And they must say, the one country that has studied the collapse of the Soviet Union more carefully than any country in the world is China, because China knows that the dream of the United States is to make China the second Soviet Union that collapses. So how does China prevent a collapse? And so China realizes, to make sure I survive, I must have a very strong, dynamic economy and a strong, dynamic society. And by the way, there was a very famous American thinker, George Kennan, who said way back in 1949, very presciently he said, at the end of the day, the outcome of the contest between United States and Soviet Union will depend on not on our weapons and troops and all that. It will depend on which society has got greater spiritual vibrancy inside, stronger. And so United States society was far more dynamic than Soviet Union society. United States thrived, Soviet Union collapsed. So the Chinese know that the first priority is to make sure your economy is strong and your society is strong, which is why they're massively educating their people and growing their economy so that they don't become a second Soviet Union. The second thing the Chinese learned from the collapse of the Soviet Union was that the United States succeeded because it managed to get a lot of the neighbors of the Soviet Union to join the containment policy everywhere. Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, right? Both ends of the Soviet Union. So what did the Chinese do? The Chinese launched a preemptive strike against a containment policy by making sure that its neighbors depended on the Chinese economy. I'll give you a simple example. Singapore is part of Southeast Asia, and we are part of an organization called ASEAN. And ASEAN started as a pro-American organization, okay? In fact, when ASEAN was created on August 8, 1967, both the Soviet Union and China denounced the creation of ASEAN as a pro-American organization, right? And it's true, ASEAN was pro-American, pro-Western. And what was stunning was that even though ASEAN was pro-American, pro-Western, and we had longer dialogues with United States, European Union, Australia, Japan, everybody, none of our Western friends proposed a free trade agreement to ASEAN. The first country to propose a free trade agreement to ASEAN was China in 2001. And the impact of that China-ASEAN agreement was phenomenal. Because in the year 2000, and that's when China proposed the free trade agreement, ASEAN's trade with the United States was 135 billion, and our trade with China was only 40 billion. So US trade was, more than 3.5 times what China's trade with ASEAN was. But as a result of the free trade agreement, by 2022, even though ASEAN's trade with United States has gone from 135 to 450, 500 billion, an increase of over 3 times, China's trade with ASEAN went from 40 billion to $975 billion, almost $1 trillion. The world's largest trading relationship in 2022. So then there's no way ASEAN can join a containment policy against its largest trading partner, right? It's crazy. So that's part of the Chinese strategy. And I mentioned a third one very quickly. You take the Belt and Road Initiative that China has launched, building infrastructure in all corners of the world. What does that mean? Every country in the world says, oh, this infrastructure is good. I need Chinese fast trains, I need Chinese highways. And then would you join a containment policy? You won't. So it shows you that they have systematically worked out a grand strategy. But at the same time, I can tell you that the Chinese also have a lot of respect for the United States. They understand that United States as a power is a remarkable power. And so their challenge is, even with all this strategy, they cannot underestimate what the United States can eventually do.